Starter Pokemon, they don't need an introduction. Magical creatures by our side from our first steps in every adventure. Talking about strength deployed within the games, there's absolute equality between all the starters and their respective evolutions. How else could the decision be so transcendental? Logically, their power is equivalent, but canonically, things change because if we make the effort to transfer them to a real battlefield, some would be a lot more dangerous than others. And that's what we've come to today. We'll order the final stages of the starter Pokemon from the strongest to the weakest. But don't worry, keep it cool. We are not considering mega evolutions or derivatives to avoid unfair advantages. Pikachu and Eevee will be left out because I can, and the categories will group beings with similar potential. We will use all the Pokemon data that the franchise gives us, and done! That's enough info because it's time to start. I have more than proved that I'm not part of the generalized bullying of this little bean. It's cute, and in Korea they're also based, as you youngsters say. But canonically, it doesn't have much to offer. Its mere presence is refreshing. Being by its side is a sensation similar to standing in the shade in the middle of summer. Its fragrance soothes the spirits and has healing properties for itself too, being able to regenerate its wounds with its particular photosynthesis. Do you see where I'm going with all this? It has talents, but none of them are very useful offensively. Obviously, it's capable of using common plant-like techniques, and maybe its ability to sleep and ease the rest would give it a chance. Probably more in the real world than in the games and their percentages, but in a group of monsters like the starters are, I wouldn't expect much. This really hurts, you know, to have spent all these years defending these two misguided souls of the most bully fandom of all time, only to do this now. What an unfortunate coincidence that the worst part in terms of power goes to the usual, and that the Diva Prime Arena has such a clear dissonance between what it's in the game and what it would be brought to reality. To begin with, it doesn't seem to be very interested in battles, focusing on making them a great spectacle in the eyes of the audience, at best overwhelming their hearts. And at worst, it's a specialist in creating water bubbles that either explode on contact or allow it to use them as a springboard with which to glide gracefully around the enemy. Sounds like a great show, but if you think about it, it's pretty sad. Its big technique is hot water bubbles, which at best will cause superficial burns to the opponent if they reach it, because I've seen GTA cops move faster than that attack. What kind of fake PNG wouldn't dodge that? In-game, it's another story, where it's a dangerous beast, but on a real battlefield, any mermaid in the history of fiction would get further. Tier C for average Pokemon. Strong, but no big deal when it comes to starters or Pokemon with good, sometimes brutal traits, but overly exploitable weaknesses. Seriously, has anyone stopped to think for 2 minutes about this creature? Far from what it's capable of in the games, it has the power of soccer, capable of playing with space-time at a level that not even Dialga, Palkia, Victini together could achieve. But it's quite mediocre if we take it seriously. Cinderace stands out for its excellent physical abilities. It's very athletic and has the strongest legs on the list, along with Blaziken. With its dribbling, it's able to dodge, confuse, and get away from a lot of opponents. But when it comes to attacking, oh dear, its attacks are shots of pebbles or material from the ground that it sets on fire with its igneous pads. Devastating indeed, but extremely easy to neutralize. Any intelligent opponent would focus on attacking its legs, injuring it. And if that happened, it would be defenseless both defensively and offensively, as its whole style depends on them. If its main technique is neutralized, it's one of the most helpless starters, as it's not good at anything else. Our buddy Rillaboom is a similar case, one of the best musicians in the Pokemon kingdom, but equally limited and easy to neutralize. Its combat style is very ingenious. Its instrument is actually a magical tree stump whose roots are directed by a pattern of rhythmic beats that only it knows. An excellent skill, but once again tremendously limited. It's overly dependent on that magic stump, a unique weapon in the world that, if neutralized, would leave it helpless. In its favor, perhaps it would not be so much as a Cinderace having also good stamina and brute strength, but it's very peaceful and not very skilled in fist fights. Its future doesn't look bright. Venusaur, Swampert, Torterra, and Empoleon are all Pokemon without such exploitable weaknesses, but surprisingly average canonically speaking, at least from the data that we have. Venusaur is known for many reasons. Among them, for its Solar Beam, the most legendary of the series and one of the most powerful thanks to its large characteristic flower specialized in that single move. Too bad it's also the most obvious attack ever. Charging it takes too long and holds its direction, making it stupidly easy to dodge and leaving Venusaur vulnerable in the meantime. Besides that, at least it has other weapons. Venusaur is quite skilled at causing status problems, which would put it slightly above those seen before, but its effective specialized techniques leave it even more helpless when it can't use them. Just in case there's any doubt, we're talking about pretty strong monsters already, so relax. But Swampert is the biggest downgrade in the history of starters, or the second or the third. Swampert is a huge downgrade from the games, where it dominated in an unprecedented way with its incredible types, stats, and moves. But outside of these, nothing stands out too much about it. It's said to have very good eyesight and considerable strength, being able to drag boulders weighing more than a ton. That doesn't sound like a lot of weight with some Russians dragging 30-ton planes, but because it bases its power entirely on that strength and some average use of water attacks for its type. Nothing about it makes me think it can stand out too much. The other earthquake junkie Torterra seems to be even physically stronger to the point of having no predators in the areas near rivers it inhabits. On the other hand, it's really peaceful to the point of letting small Pokemon live their whole lives in its shell. It doesn't have any particular deadly tactic in combat apart from biting and being the slowest of all the starters. Empoleon, contrary to popular belief, is also extremely peaceful, being only when its pride is hurt that it brings out its true power. Being able to swim at high speeds, a pretty bold skill on your part being the water starter in Sinnoh. Its attacks are strong, but pale against opponents more specialized in fighting as such. Quaquaval possesses exceptional athletic abilities and showcases a refined fighting style that blends martial arts with dance, reminiscent of capoeira. They excel in close quarters combat, but their effectiveness wanes when facing adversaries who possess a broader array of tools and techniques. Now, Tier B is the one that for me holds most of the starters. Pokemon clearly above the average with great natural power and abilities. Seriously, it's 2022. What were you expecting? Charizard in the first place? Are we Watch Mojo? Charizard stands out for being one of the few starters capable of flying, an ability that it may not be able to exploit as much since its attacks don't have such a long range, being restricted to short and medium range combat, but it's still very powerful. Of course, its proud and overconfident temper can be problematic, as it has been demonstrated on more than one occasion. It tends to underestimate opponents it considers weaker, and that could take its toll on it. Besides that, its powerful flames combined with its aerial combat make it a formidable opponent, and it's no coincidence that so many legendary trainers rely on its strength. Now, fear for Alligator. Its jaw. Okay, I'll stop. Its jaw is among the most powerful in the world, and although it doesn't stand out for its speed, it reaches a dizzying speed when launching its attack. If it gets you, you're done. It's certainly not the most inventive in terms of its abilities, but it should not be underestimated. The other croc on the list, Skeledirge, also possesses a formidable niche ability. A small bird on its snout that transforms into a microphone, capable of altering the mood of anyone who listens to it. Its sound carries over long distances, easily bewildering opponents in the vicinity. Combined with its powerful flames, Skeledirge becomes a highly dangerous adversary. Incineroar has everything to give a good fight. It's not something crazy, but it has a good physical condition. Expert in a style of wrestling, adapted to kill, that complements with unexpected fire attacks from its belt, which burn more the stronger its opponent and the greater its fighting spirit is. Of course, we can't forget its most characteristic trait, or its second most characteristic trait, its total lack of honor and manners when fighting, throwing blows treacherously and using whatever tricks and tactics are necessary to defeat its opponent. It's a rather average Pokemon in terms of skills, whose attitude of seeking victory, no matter what, escalates its danger exponentially. It can, however, become demotivated and lose concentration when facing weaker enemies, which could play a trick on it. Superior is the opposite. Noble and loyal, but also quite pretentious. It's also more dangerous than it looks. Even though it has no legs, it glides at a stupid speed that makes it seem to levitate. There are many fast Pokemon, but a fast Pokemon that is an expert in strangling and suffocating an opponent with its body is pretty fucked up. Few could really defend against its attack. But hey, it's the Pokemon world where breathing is optional, so it's not creepy at all. Sceptile is even faster, and its blade leaves are extremely dangerous. It's not a very novel fighting style, to say the least, but it's no less deadly for that. The Pokédex mentions that its power is without equal in its habitat. No one, not even Zarude, can beat it in the jungle. And given its role as its protector, using the spores on its backs to make sure that trees and plants grow healthy, I'd like to think that it's the jungle itself that lends Sceptile its strength in return. Of course, this is not a ranking of legendaries, so that's unlikely to be true, referring that supposed invincibility probably to the fact that it knows that environment to perfection, being able to deploy its agility and skills and making use of the tools it provides most. Outside of its ideal environment, it's still a ridiculously fast Pokemon with katanas in its arms. Good luck with that. Blastoise would be one of the strongest in the category. It's better than it looks. Its cannon shots are very hard hits that, unlike Venusaur's Solar Beam, it can fire quickly without recharging or holding just one direction, and as a nice tortoise, it's also very good defensively, being able to hide in its shell. Its cannons also allow it to propel itself at high speeds, and it has great brute strength to deploy if the situation calls for it. It could be the Pokemon whose role in the games most closely resembles reality. The versatility it displays in the games, but there is one group that has not yet appeared and you surely are missing, so let's get to the challenge. The 3 fire fighting starters are very similar. Experienced fighters with their own fighting style that they complement with powerful flames. Canonically, they are very evenly matched, but there is a key point that is not relevant in the games, but it can help us to separate them. Their combat system or martial art. With this consideration, I would say that the weakest is Infernape, who is an expert in the famous monkey kung fu, a spectacular style of incredible speed and acrobatics that makes it one of the most difficult to master, but probably not as effective as other styles in real combat, and that surely would have problems when it comes to being put in practice in a real battle against beings like these. With respect to all styles, of course, I don't want any Shaolin monk watching the video wanting to knock me out. In terms of stats, this is reflected once again in being the least brutal attacker of the 3, staying in Tier B. Emboar would also go to Tier B, being less educated than Infernape in a particular art or combat system, but with a much superior brute strength than the other 2. But indeed, Blaziken is the one that would have the upper hand for me, reaching Tier A. With its use of fists and kicks alike, aesthetics, and especially the poses of its artworks and signature attacks, there is no doubt that its specialty is Muay Thai, a martial art that has rightfully earned the title of one of the most brutal and effective in the world. It's the perfect balance between discipline, effectiveness, and natural power, and if you ask me, it would be the winner of this brawl. Let's see who would be with it in Tier A. AKA the most powerful and deadly Pokemon for me, with abilities and strength so overwhelming that they would make the rest look like children. Samurott is a Pokemon of incredible strength, with one of the most polished techniques on the ranking. It's a legendary samurai who tries to avoid confrontation with looks that manage to intimidate most opponents without even having to face them. But if the battle starts, it will use its razor shell looking to finish it in just one slash to the opponent's vital points, without giving it a chance to defend itself. It's one of the most specialized Pokemon in finishing off the opponent silently and effectively, which automatically makes it one of the biggest threats. Decidueye, unlike some Pokemon we have seen, does better here than its stats and performance in the game say. It's the best archer in the Pokemon world, and one particularly dangerous. It can make itself indiscernible to the eye and shoot its own feathers like arrows from long distances and with ghostly accuracy. Its signature move, Spirit Shackle, also prevents the enemy from fleeing, so if you fall into its trap, it can become a nightmare. Although its hits are somewhat weak by the standards of the list, imagine the situation of receiving arrows aimed at vital points from an invisible attacker in the shadows. Greninja, even without some script advantage, is a more than worthy contender. Right off the bat, it's the fastest starter, with the speed that it uses to overwhelm the enemy and make it dizzy to then launch its shurikens, which are nothing more than compressed water, thrown with such force that it can cut through metal. I don't know if it's fair to also consider its ability Prochin, a hidden one, so we can assume that few specimens have it, but it would make it an even more versatile fighter. But even without it, I doubt that a ninja frog throwing Kenzans is anything to joke about, really. Typhlosion isn't very complex, but it basically wipes everything out. It's a walking volcano, and as if that weren't enough, it knows how to adopt defensive stances by curling up on itself and standing on two legs to perform other types of attacks with its limbs, but its eruptions are still its most devastating power. And realistically, based on what we have seen, few could survive that. Chestnut would be one of them, who manages to get so far from me thanks to a niche ability that sets it apart from all the others. It's the only fully fledged defensive specialist. That's not a trivial thing. The starters stand out for being very offensive creatures that base their strategy on a specialty or devastating blow, and being the only one capable of surviving most of these attacks increases a lot its chances of success. Its spiky shield can stop the impact of a bomb, which is obviously a scale of destruction above what any starter can do, so we can assume that it could resist any of these attacks. Little is said about how offensively the Pokédex specifically says that it's capable of overturning a 50-ton tank with its arms. That is 50 times what Swampert can do, and twice as much as the Russian guy from before. A brute force that as a fighting Pokemon skilled in different fighting styles, Chestnut can take advantage of. Meowscarada is arguably the most intelligent of all the starters, equipped with an arsenal of tricks and a special instinct that make it one of the top contenders. Its specialty in combat lies in planting seeds on its enemies without their knowledge, only to make them explode at the moment when vulnerability is exposed and their weak spot is revealed. With its talent for going unnoticed and its creative adaptability to any given situation, Meowscarada could cause a true massacre and emerge victorious from most encounters. Not even the strongest fortress like Chestnut would be safe from an expert at penetrating any defense. Delphox, the Oracle, is close to the top as the only mage on the ranking, which gives it an outrageous advantage. All of its tricks revolve around fire, which, far from limiting it, gives Delphox incredible versatility and an arsenal that would make it nearly invincible in the heat of battle. From the start, it can predict the future by reading what its mystical fire has to tell. Let's suppose to a certain extent that it can see glimpses of what will happen, which would help it prepare tricks to face possible threats, which, far from limiting it, gives Delphox incredible versatility. What to say about its offensive capabilities? Summoning terrible igneous attacks at a temperature that triples the hottest fire on Earth and instantly scorches the vast majority of Pokemon that don't have some kind of special resistance. What sets it apart from other fire starters is that its attacks make use of its psychic power, making them much more dangerous and unpredictable. As a good magic specialist, Delphox is physically weak, so a good direct strike could knock it out. But with its prophetic abilities, it would not be easy to catch it off guard, and it can also easily burn this type of attackers, a top enemy that few could cope with. In fact, in my opinion, there is only one more dangerous Pokemon above it, to which I have reserved the tier S, in a tier exclusive to it. Being in a hypothetical battle royal virtually invincible is none other than Inteleon. Do you remember that about Decidueye being an invisible attacker launching awful arrows from far away? Now imagine that same thing in a creature of much greater range and aiming distance, whose shots can have a speed of Mach 3 times the speed of sound, and approximately twice the speed of a sniper rifle. It's also invisible due to its ability to blend in with its surroundings. The very concept of this Pokemon is based heavily on a professional assassin, so there's not much to do against it. It would be able to annihilate enemies with shots that would be an insta-kill in most cases from an overwhelming distance, and even if they discovered its whereabouts, they would hardly detect it. And even if detected, it could escape with its great speed to another strategic point from which to continue its killing spree. It really seems like a Pokemon much more designed to sweep in a scenario like the one we have raised than in traditional battles. Even if for some reason it had to be in close combat, its agility only surpassed by Greninja, its ability to glide, run through water, or its hidden aces such as the sharp knife in its tail. Starters are powerful creatures that symbolize the importance of raising your Pokemon correctly to become strong together. But Inteleon is a professional assassin, conceived with a license to kill in the fastest and most gentlemanly way possible. So there's not much more to talk about, at least from my side.